AR-15 is one of the most unique weapon platforms in the world for a few different reasons. One of the reasons is because you can buy an AR-15 for $500, or you can buy an AR-15 for $4,000, and on paper, they have the exact same capabilities when it comes down to things like max effective range. The other big thing that makes AR-15 so unique to me is just how customizable they are. Now, you can customize almost every weapon platform out there, but there are very, very few. In fact, I don't think there's anything quite as customizable as the AR-15, where you can get down to even customizing the type of springs that go into your pivot pins. You can customize literally every single little detail about your AR-15, and that is very unique to this platform specifically. Now, in this video, we're gonna be going over this rifle build right here. This is a custom AR-15 build, but before we get into this gun and its intended purpose and everything like that, we need to talk about these other two rifles that are on the table. Now, this video is finishing a video series that we started over on our Armory channel, going over just different ways you can build out your AR-15, as in price points and what their intended purpose is. Now, the first video we did in this series is over on our Armory YouTube channel, and it was going over this gun right here. So this was prioritizing value when building out an AR-15, so basically best bang for your buck. And the intention behind this gun was building out an AR-15 for that prepared citizen type loadout. So this is a gun that you would build, zero, get set up, leave in your gun safe. So if there was ever basically anything that ever went wrong, you would have a rifle that was set up that could take care of whatever the situation was, whether it was zombies, whether it was home defense, you name it. This was, again, just kind of that prepared citizen type rifle. Now, this rifle has changed a little bit since that video, but all intents and purposes, it's the same setup. So this rifle right here, now it did have a suppressor on it when we made that video, but this rifle right here with the suppressor and tax stamp and everything that's going on in this gun was about $7,000. And just like the other two guns on this table, it's very opinionated, but I did find that this rifle right here was a very good value for what you were paying for in terms of what capability you had in a rifle. The next video we did in this video series was going over a budget rifle setup. So this rifle actually has two YouTube videos. We have one on our main channel, and then we also have a breakdown of this gun over on our Armory channel as well. And this was the budget rifle. So this rifle in its entirety was about $1,500, and that is including the spray paint, the optic, the light, literally everything. In the Armory channel video, when we were going over some of the build, I did explain how we could have saved even more money on this. We could have got it down to about $1,200, $1,300. So very, very interesting build. And this gun was set up specifically for having a gun that was set up for home defense for that prepared citizen, but also a gun that was set up to be able to use in a competition type setup. So in the video on the main channel, we ran this gun in a practical carbine match. I won the match with this gun. So all that to say is that the gun proved to be very, very capable, and it was very, very cheap. So now that we recapped the first two videos that we did, going over the value AR-15 and then the budget AR-15, let's get into this AR-15 right here. So with the budget AR-15, we had a gun that was set up for competition and home defense, and then we had the value AR-15 that was more set up just for that prepared citizen. So again, that bump of the night, zombies are coming, that type of setup. Now we have a rifle that's set up specifically for competition. So what we have here is a rifle set up to prioritize performance. So obviously, when you're building something or buying something that prioritizes performance, things get pretty pricey, and we did not spare any penny when building this gun. Now, I could have obviously made this gun much more expensive. I could have bought some very Gucci, for example, lower receiver to just up the price on this, but that was not the intention of it. Kind of the point of this gun was to get the most high performing parts in certain areas for the intended purpose of this rifle. So this rifle is built around competing in the tactical games. Now, if I was building this rifle for something like 2-gun or 3-gun competition, or something like that, a little bit more practical, a little bit more dynamic, this gun would probably look a little different. Maybe I would have an 18-inch barrel with a muzzle brake on it. I would have a fixed stock. I would have maybe even a skeleton lower. I could do some pretty crazy stuff with this, but again, the intended purpose for this rifle is to compete in the tactical games. And this is actually going to be the rifle that I compete with all season this year. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, all of these small parts of this rifle, we need to talk about the history of this gun, because this gun has been rebuilt a couple times actually. So the lower and upper receiver, the buffer tube, some of the internal parts have been in this rifle for a very long time. But like I said, it's been rebuilt a few times. So this is actually the third rebuild of this rifle. So all I have to say, upper receiver, lower receiver, buffer tube, some of the small parts have a very, very high round count on them, pushing well over 20,000 rounds. So that is one reason why I didn't change out the lower to get a more Gucci lower. It's one reason why I didn't change out the upper to get a more Gucci upper receiver, although it's a Viltor, so it's already pretty fancy. So just to keep that in mind as we move forward. So one of the main data points that I want to get out of this video is actually comparing the performance of the new rifle build to the previous rifle build. So the previous rifle build is actually a kit that we sell on the website. This is something we call the T.REX upper receiver group kit. And what it comes with is a Criterion core barrel. In the case of this gun, it's a 13.9 inch. Our kit will come with a Badger Ordnance gas block, but this one I have a BCM gas block. Both this gun, what the gun was, and the kit that we sell will come with a BCM gas tube. Now this barrel does have a Surefire 3-prong muzzle device pin and welded. If you buy our kit off our website, you'll get an A2 flash hider regardless of the length of barrel that you get. You will also get a T.REX branded sand cutter bolt carrier group with the Headspace BCM bolt for the barrel. And then that's going to be the entirety of the kit itself. But the rail that I had on this gun was a C4 Centurion M-LOK rail. So given the fact that this rifle is set up for competing in the tactical games, we're going to run a mock skirmish match with this rifle. Now this mock skirmish match is actually a match we're hosting for our employees here at the company, and I've actually already done all the stages. I've already proofed all the stages for running the match with the rifle in its previous configuration. So when we re-proof the stages, we're going to be able to see a little bit of that practical accuracy comparison, as in, did I actually perform better with the rifle under duress, under competition, comparatively to the rifle in its previous configuration. Now the data, when we talk about the mechanical accuracy, this is data that eliminates as many human variables as possible, and we just see the cold hard accuracy difference between the two guns. But before we get into the mechanical accuracy data between both of the rifle setups, we're going to talk about every single part in this gun because I'm sure that is what you guys are going to find most interesting. So like we talked about in the little opener for this talking point, AR-15s can be very, very customizable. You can literally customize every single little part in this down to what type of spring do you have in your pivot pin. Do you have mil-spec? Do you have stainless steel? You can get pretty wild with this gun, and I have a lot of autism. I'm very specific with what I like, and literally I handpicked every single component in this rifle. So we're going to start with the muzzle device and work our way all the way back to the gun. We're going to save the accessories for last. So the muzzle device on this gun is actually from Forward Controls Design. This is their A2 flash hider. The reason why I picked this muzzle device is because A2 flash hiders are a very good flash hider, but they're also a very good compensator. So in the tactical games, you can't run muzzle devices like war comps. You can't run muzzle brakes. Just due to not having a super concussive rifle next to other shooters that are on the firing line. But A2 flash hiders are available, and I don't want to run a suppressor. Obviously a suppressor would be a little bit better for mitigating recoil, but we also have to run very long distances with this rifle. I have to shoot standing freestyle, as you would call it. So basically I'm standing shooting at targets very far away. So I just don't want to front end weight, basically, so that's why I don't have a suppressor. So A2 flash hider, in my opinion, is going to be the best muzzle device for the sports because I do get a little bit of compensation support from the A2 flash hider. It's very small, it's not heavy, so that is why I went with the FCD. The FCD does have more aggressive ports comparatively to a standard A2 flash hider, so again, just a little bit more compensation from this muzzle device comparatively to a mil-spec. Now I'm not using a crush washer with it, I'm actually using a Surefire shim kit. That's important to note because crush washers can be over-torqued, and if you over-torque a muzzle device onto a barrel, especially a barrel like this that is stainless steel, you can stretch the threads and that can affect accuracy. So I actually have this torqued down to spec as it would be if it was a Surefire muzzle device, so very low torque spec with the Surefire shim device. Now the barrel, the most important component of this rifle in my opinion, is a 16-inch proof research stainless steel barrel that's wrapped in carbon fiber, and it's a 1 in 7 twist. So this is obviously the biggest significant upgrade to the rifle, is going from a Criterion to a Perf Research. Well, we don't know if it's a significant upgrade yet, but the price point definitely suggests that because this is a $1,000 barrel. Very expensive. Going on from there, we have a rifle speed gas block. So this gas block allows me a lot of adjustments with gas controls. So given the fact that this is a competition rifle, I want to mitigate recoil as much as possible. So that is step number one when it comes down to mitigating recoil, is having an adjustable gas block. Now, obviously, a lot of people run adjustable gas blocks for their suppressed rifle, so they'll have like a suppressed setting, a non-suppressed setting. But in this case, what I have is I'm going to have multiple settings marked on this. I'm going to have one that is just that bleeding edge of reliability. So if I'm on a stage, I'm only shooting a few rounds at a time, shooting at distance. I want to mitigate recoil as much as possible so I can get back on target as fast as possible when, again, I'm shooting distance. And then I'm going to have some adverse settings. So if I am shooting the gun very quickly or the gun's getting very dirty, I can just turn up the gas a little bit. It's going to increase recoil a little bit, but I know the gun's going to cycle reliably. So that is why I went with the rifle rifle speed. There is 12 adjustment settings on this, so I have a lot of room to play with my gas settings here. Now the gas tube that goes with the gas block is from Rifle Speed as well. It's a straight gas tube. It's a proprietary gas tube that you have to use with the gas block, so nothing crazy going on there. Now moving on to the handguard, we have a Lancer carbon fiber handguard with their premium slots cut out of it, so that's just supposed to reduce weight, I'm pretty sure, and there is no top rail, so it is completely slick. Now the reason why I went with this handguard specifically is all about balance. So the weight of this gun is not lighter per se than, you know, a typical duty style rifle setup, but it's very, very well balanced. So the balance of this rifle is actually closer to the trigger guard comparatively to most rifles. It's going to be more towards the barrel nut. So what that means is a lot of the weight's pushed to the back. It's not very front heavy at all. So this actually feels like I'm wielding like a 10-3 or something, which is very, very nice. So the carbon fiber handguard was selected to help with that balance point. It just brings a lot of the weight more towards the barrel nut, because actually this handguard weighs the same as the Centurion handguard, but like I said, all of the weight is more towards the back of it. Now I went with a slick top for the handguard because I want to be able to fit the gun into barricade ports a little bit better. We do shoot off barricades quite a bit in the sport. So now the other reason why I went with the slick top is I don't mount anything to this gun. You know, I'm not mounting a laser or anything like that. But if I did want to mount a flashlight, there is M-LOK slots on this gun. So if I decided to use this gun for, you know, a practical carbine match that requires the use of white light, I can still attach a flashlight to it and be totally okay. Now the first piece of furniture that we have attached to the gun here is actually just this camo wrap tape. So camo wrap tape is good for a lot of different things. One, for grip on your rifle, two, for helping with heat mitigation. But another thing that I really like it for is actually having good support on barricades. So think about if you're shooting off a barricade with a big sandbag, why sandbags are good. They're very soft, they're very cushiony, you can lean into them, and it's not just like two hard surfaces rubbing against each other that are gonna have a lot of wobble. Now this tape actually kind of acts like that. So if I put this gun on a barricade, it's nice and soft and mushy. You know, obviously not extensively soft because, you know, it's just a couple layers of tape, but it does help with the gun not from moving around as much on a barricade as if the handguard was slick. Right behind the tape, we have a impact weapons component hand stop. So I see a lot of people running hand stops towards the end of their rifle, and this is obviously for loading barricades or even using it as a way to pull the rifle into your shoulder. But what I did here is I actually put the hand stop is almost as far back as I possibly can, because when I load a barricade or when I am mounted on a barricade, this is about where my hand is going to be. So basically, I don't want to reach my hand all the way forward when I mount a barricade, because that's going to torque my body out from being square behind the gun, which is something obviously I don't want for recoil control reasons. And also with this hand stop being all the way towards the back, if I do have to shoot off of something that's, you know, more conventional, like the hood of a car or a giant rock or a log or something like that, it's out of the way. It's not going to be something like a hand stop that's in the middle of the barricade that's going to get completely in the way of mounting on those more unconventional types shooting positions. Continuing on with the upper receiver, like I said, we're going to save the accessories for last. We have a Viltor Mur upper receiver. This is my favorite upper receiver that you can buy for AR-15s. I like how the forward assist is pushed forward. I like the way they look. They're generally thermofit as well. This one's thermofit, so even after this this upper receiving having multiple different barrels put in and installed, I still need to use the heat gun to heat it up to attach the barrel. So Viltor Mur, and this is where we're going to start to see some of that very specific nitty-gritty details with some of these small parts in the rifle. So almost all of the small parts in this rifle are from Forward Control Designs. I think they are expensive, but I do think they bring an improvement to the gun. So with the dust cover, we have the EPC from Forward Control Designs. It's just actually completely not necessary. You know, they don't provide much of a benefit, but I think they look cool, so I added it. Moving back from there, we have a Forward Controls low drag forward assist. It's either low drag or low snag, but basically this forward assist just removes that catch point that's on mil-spec forward assist, and this is actually really, really important for the Viltor Mur, because if I want to actually be able to articulate the charging handle on this side, I need this one to make this gun actually full hammy. So if I had a mil-spec forward assist here, there's a catch there, and it can get in the way of your finger. If you never noticed that with mil-spec upper receivers, how the forward assist is, you know, in the traditional spot, it's kind of hard to get to your charging handle if you have an ambi charging handle. It is, you know, not the end of the world, but if I have a way to improve upon that, so I can actually have a full ambi control without, you know, anything getting away with my hand, I'm going to do it. So that's why I have the Forward Controls low snag, low drag forward assist, whatever it's called there. Now the bolt carrier group in this gun is a KAK premium bolt carrier group. So this is MP3 coated, it's downward vented, it has dual ejectors, it's got sand cutters on it. This is the top of the line bolt carrier group from KAK. that they offer currently. And as we've been testing bolt carrier groups, you know, and selecting a bolt carrier that was going to go into our upper receiver kit, we obviously tested KAK because that's the company that makes the carrier for our kit. We found that KAK is definitely one of the premium bolt carrier options on the market. Their attention to detail is very, very impressive. And after talking with their guys, some of their engineers and some of the guys that helped us design their products, I have just grown really, really fond of KAK as a company in general when it comes down to the type of products they make. Actually, the bolt carrier group that's in the budget AR-15 is also KAK, and it performed very, very well, and the bolt carrier group was very, very cheap. The charging handle that's in this gun is just a Radiant SD charging handle, so obviously this gun's not suppressed, but as you can tell with the downward vents, the SD charging handle and the adjustable gas block, I'm trying to mitigate gas to my face as much as I can. Even though the gun's not suppressed, you still get gas to the face when you're shooting unsuppressed. And all of those things put together really, really helps mitigate the gas. One more thing to note about the upper receiver before we move on to the lower is I cut a hole in this Lancer handguard. So this Lancer handguard is not cheap. It's very, very expensive. But we had to cut a hole in it for the gas block because this rifle speed adjustable gas block is very tall and it was touching the handguard essentially. So I had to cut a small hole out of it. So if you notice that, that is why. And obviously, you know, I'm not mounting anything on the top of this. There's no rail or anything, so not a big deal. It doesn't really jeopardize the integrity of this rail whatsoever. And it wouldn't matter if it did. I'm not mounting anything to it. But just in case you notice that there, there's a hole in the rail because the gas block's quite large. Now, one more thing to note with this handguard, because there's no Picatinny on top or no rail or anything, the top of this rail gets extremely, extremely hot. The rest of this gun actually stays really, really cool as you're shooting it, but that gas tube is literally right there. It gets very, very hot, and that is something I did not expect. So if I were to redo this build, I would definitely get a rail with something on top here. So maybe I'll just add some more tape or something, but like I said, this gun gets noticeably hot very quickly because of how close that gas tube is to where your hand is touching. So speaking of modifications, there's a couple different things that happen to this gun to make all of the parts fit. And that is an important thing to understand when you are building out, you know, AR-15s. I did say that they are like Legos, but there is something called tolerance stacking. Every company is going to try to adhere to mil-spec standards as best they can when it comes to these small parts, but they're not all exactly the same. So we actually get a pretty good example of that here with this gun. And I'm going to be able to demonstrate this as I be able to try to take the upper receiver off. So as you can see, this is very tight. So this gun won't even break down shotgun style for my Marines out there. But what we had to do here is we had to actually Dremel part of the lower receiver off, and that is due to how tight the barrel nut from this Lancer handguard attaches to the upper receiver. I actually couldn't even get a pivot pin to go through at all. So we had to Dremel off part of the lower receiver. It wasn't much, it was very, very small. And I don't really care, to be honest. It's just an arrow lower, but just something to understand if you are building out a custom AR-15 like this, you start putting all of these Gucci parts into it, you may run into some tolerance stacking issues like that there. It doesn't affect performance or anything. You know, it's just a couple passes with a file and it was good to go. So getting into the lower receiver itself, we have an Arrow X15 lower. So like I said, I could have picked some Gucci lower receiver like ADM or LMT or something to really up the price on this gun. But the purpose of this gun is not to have the most expensive rifle out there, it's to have the most high performing rifle out there. And a lower is just a lower. Arrow makes good lowers. They're very consistent and they're a pretty good price. So X15 lower is what we got going on here. So it's just their mil-spec lower. We have all Forward Control Designs small parts to include the pivot pins, the magazine release, even the buffer retaining pin is from Forward Control Designs, the end plate, the castle nut, the trigger guard. The only small part in here that's not Forward Controls is the bolt catch in the safety, and if you want to consider the fire control group or the trigger is not either. The buffer tube is also Forward Control Design, so all I have to say, I really like Forward Controls. Like I said, I think they just improve upon the little things pretty well. You do pay for it, but I just find their parts to be quite nice. So the bolt catch and the safety are from our lower parts kit. I went with a mil-spec bolt catch so I can attach a bed lever to it. Forward Controls makes some fancy bolt catches, but you can't attach a bed lever to them. So just went with the mil-spec from our lower parts kit. And then our safety, I think it's the best safety in the world. It is phenomenal. It's extremely snappy. It's very satisfying just to play with. And is actually the reason why I selected it to go into our lower parts kit. So I have our safety going on there. The trigger is the Geisley SDE trigger. So that is just the 2-stage flat face trigger with only 3.5 pound brake. So it's a pretty light trigger, and given the round count of this gun, it's gotten even lighter. It's very crisp. I like the trigger quite a bit. We do have a HRF polymer magwell on here. That's not necessarily needed for the sport, but I like it. The pistol grip we have here is from Emissary Development. This is their actual grip, the full size. These are my favorite pistol grips. Currently for AR-15s, I like these, Magpul K2s, or just standard A2 grips. Honestly, any of them would work fine, but with the sport of the tactical games, we do generally get really, really dirty and muddy, so the aggressive texture of this pistol grip has been beneficial from time to time, so that is why I have chosen this grip. The buffer system is an A5 buffer system, so we have a Forward Control Designs buffer tube. I will say their buffer tubes are probably the best out there. The Sons of Liberty also uses them, and that is because they have a coating inside the buffer tube, so it makes the action of your gun very, very smooth. So if you are going to be looking at getting a buffer tube for your gun, I highly recommend Forward Controls or Sons of Liberty because of that coating. It's just going to make the gun feel that much smoother. And the buffer that we have in here is a BCM T2 with a Springco green rifle length spring. That's just, you know, the nature of A5 buffers is they need a rifle length spring. So I think the A5 buffer system is a huge improvement for AR-15s because it just gets the gun closer to the original operating system length that the rifle and cartridge was originally intended for, and that was the rifle length 20-inch barrel. So if we're able to extend the operating system a little bit of the gun, that's obviously a step in the right direction, in my opinion, and I would think a lot of manufacturers like Sons of Liberty, for example, would tend to agree. The last part we're going to talk about on the gun before we get into the accessories is the stock. So this is a BCM SOP Mod 0 stock, if I remember correctly, and we have a bag rider attached to it that I cut in half. So I cut the bag rider in half because I don't actually use the bag rider all that often, but I do use it to zero the gun, and the BCM stock just has nothing there. So I just wanted just a little bit of surface area there, so I attached it, cut it off, and that's what's going on there. So just another area where I used a Dremel professionally on this rifle. Moving on to the accessories of the gun, we have a Night Force Attacker, ATACR, however you want to say it, 1 to 8 mounted in their Ultra mount. This is my favorite LPVO on the market. Now I will say if there was something like a 2 to 12 or even a 2.5 to 15, some medium power optic that had a smaller erector ratio but still had daylight bright illumination in it, that would be the obvious optic of choice. Currently we don't have that, so I'm just running the 1 to 8 for now. Now I will say at Nationals we shot out to 650 yards with on movers, and there's only a couple people that beat me on that stage, and I was using a 1 to 8. Some people are using 2.5 to 20s, 3.6 to 18s with 18-inch barrels, and I did that with a 13.9-inch Cartesian core and just a 1 to 8. So it is good enough to shoot out the distance. But the one thing that we really like the higher magnification optics for in this sport is being able to see the paper targets that we shoot at distance. So sometimes we shoot targets out to 250, 300 yards during normal stages, and we need to be able to see our hits in case that we don't have the proper hold. So that's where the higher magnification optics become a huge benefit for the sport. Now the offset optic is an Aimpoint T2. This is gonna sound a little bit weird, I know, but it's just the spare optic I had laying around. I did have an SRO on there, but the offset optic is something I actually never have used in the sport. There has only been one case where I could have used it, but I ended up using the LPVO instead for a number of different reasons. But I have the T2 on there because I don't have to worry about it if it gets banged around, unlike the SRO. And the SRO I could have used on a different pistol instead. So the SRO is actually a little bit more valuable to me comparatively to the T2. So I have a T2 on there just in case I do need to shoot very up close very quickly, and I need to transition quickly to shooting my LPVO at distance. But I will say if I have the opportunity to shoot up close and use my LPVO, I'm going to do it 10 out of 10 times. This is more just a backup optic, and in case, like I said, I need to shoot up close and then shoot at distance with a quick transition between those two. And the last accessory we have on here is an MDT level, electronic level. This is actually pretty important for shooting at distance, especially with 5.56 guns. So I have that on there to help with shooting at distance. And this can be used for on normal stages when we're just doing a normal style tactical game stage, or when we're doing a long range specific stage. Like I said, these levels when shooting at distance with 5.56 do prove to be very, very beneficial. And lastly, T.REX sling, obviously. Probably not going to use any other sling out there. T.REX sling is my favorite. And that is biases aside. I do think our sling is one of the best slings. Now, I do have a multicam Airage sling. This is a sling we do not produce. We've never made this sling this color. This was just a prototype. So this sling is very, very old. And I kind of like it just because, not too many people have it. As we get into the mechanical accuracy data for the new rifle configuration, just keep in mind the muzzle velocity from 13.9-inch barrel. So before we started filming this video, I took this gun out after I built it just to get the gun tuned, to just get an idea of how the gun was going to perform during the YouTube video, just make sure the gun worked basically. And I did get a couple groups fired then, and the group that I got with the 69 grain federal ammunition was 0.9 inches, so we did see an improvement of accuracy initially with this gun, but the average muzzle velocity was 25.51 with a standard deviation of 15. So that is the exact same muzzle velocity as we saw with a 13.9 inch, a significant decrease in the standard deviation performance. This is really interesting because with 2 extra inches of barrel length, we should see a significant increase in muzzle velocity. So that means there is a problem going on with this gun. It just basically means there's pressure being lost at the front or the end of the barrel. Given how accurate this gun is, I don't think it's a head spacing issue, because if the head spacing was that far out of spec, we would probably see bigger groups than this basically. But it could be something like the gas block, I don't really know. Now Lucas actually has a rifle setup that's pretty similar. His is the exact same barrel, but it's a 14.5 inch, and his gun is getting more muzzle velocity than mine. So it's the exact same barrel, exact same profile, exact same barrel twist, literally everything's the same except this is a 14.5 and mine's a 16, but he's getting more muzzle velocity out of his, which is pretty interesting. So that just shows that something is going on here. Now, he doesn't have the adjustable gas block like I do, so I'm thinking that is a problem, but we're going to have to diagnose and figure that out a little bit later. Now, the 69 grain ammunition is the ammunition I compete with, but the ammo that I actually train with most often is 62 grain PMC X-Tac. And I did get some data with that ammunition as well. So the group up top is just me zeroing the gun, so don't worry about that. Now, the group down low, 10 round group shooting at a rate of fire to get just good muzzle velocity data, so I wasn't actually trying to get a great group. 1.6 inches at 100 yards, very, very good for 62 grain. Standard deviation of 10.5 and average muzzle velocity of 28.71. So that's still pretty slow, but a really good standard deviation. Now, the data we got from that little intro montage that you guys saw at the beginning of the video was with a couple of different ammos. So we shot PMC X-Tac 77 grain, and as you guys see, this gun didn't like that ammo nearly as much. So the best group I got was 1 3/4 of an inch, or 1.75 inches. Average muzzle velocity of 23.79 with a standard deviation of 44.9. That is absolutely terrible. So obviously this gun definitely doesn't like that ammunition, which is fine. Some guns like other types of ammo more than others. Now, the second group that I did with the 69 grain proved to be the exact same as the day prior. So the data that I got not on camera. So 0.9 inch was my best group, 1.3 inch was the worst group. Standard deviation was 27.8, which is a lot more than what it was originally. And average muzzle velocity of 25.43, which is basically the same. The second round of data that I got with the 62 grain proved to be about the same. So 1.4 inch group and a 1.7 inch group, 10 round groups. The rounds marked in red were me zeroing the red dot. They don't really count. But muzzle velocity was the same, 28.75, but a standard deviation of 27.4. So standard deviation increased significantly on both the 62 grain PMC X-Tac and the federal 69 grain over the course of a day, which not really sure why. It could be weather related, highly doubt it, but just interesting to note there. So considering all that data that we gathered, we did see a marginal increase in the mechanical accuracy of the rifle from the proof research comparatively to the Criterion Core. Again, mechanical actually just means removing as many human variables as possible, so shooting off a bipod, a bag, in a very controlled and comfortable setting. But that standard deviation in muzzle velocity being basically the exact same as the 13.9 inch, like I said, a little frustrating because I'm basically shooting the exact same barrel length. I wanted that increased muzzle velocity going to the 16 inch because I wanted to not hold as much when shooting out at distance, but now, like I said, with the same muzzle velocity, it's basically shooting the same gun at distance, which is obviously not ideal considering I made the gun longer. Now what we need to do is test the actual practical accuracy of this gun. So we're gonna test if my performance has increased moving on to this rifle in a match setting comparatively to what it was with the 13.9 inch Criterion Core setup. And we're gonna do that by re-proofing all the stages that we already proofed of the local tactical game skirmish match that we're hosting for T.REX employees. So we're gonna be able to see the targets that I shot with this gun in its previous configuration and compare it directly to the targets that I'm going to shoot with the current configuration. We're going to see if I actually improved my own performance with the new rifle setup. So let's get out to the range and see how we do with the new rifle.
2, 1, go.
All right, we're back in the armory. We got all of these stages proofed for our mock tactical game skirmish that we're hosting for employees here at the company. And now we get to see some of the practical accuracy differences between the current rifle configuration and the previous rifle configuration. Now, before we get into that, I do want to talk about a component that we had to change out on this rifle due to some issues that we were having. So as we're sitting right now, this rifle has just over 1,000 rounds fired through it, but about 400 of those rounds were fired with a different bolt carrier group. The original build intent of this rifle was for it to have a low mass bolt carrier group, and that is what we had in the gun originally. However, we started to have some issues with this. Now, the reason why I wanted to go with a low mass bolt carrier group was to increase the adjustment range of the adjustable gas block. So obviously a low mass bolt carrier group, so less weight in the gun, will require less gas for the weapon to cycle. So that means I could have had an adjustment setting of, you know, like 1 or 2 or 3 maybe to get the gun to cycle, and then I would have, you know, that much more, up to 12 adjustment range for adverse type conditions. However, with this bolt carrier group, that was not what we experienced. So I was running a T0 buffer in the gun, but with this low mass carrier, which this carrier is made out of aluminum, so the carrier itself is considered expendable. This is from KAK as well. But what was happening was this carrier was having a ton of friction in the upper receiver, so it wasn't reciprocating very smoothly. There's wear all over it on the aluminum carrier itself, and when we swapped to the MP3 coated bolt carrier group that's in the gun currently with a T2 buffer, the gun actually required less gas for it to cycle, and also the recoil impulse of the gun was much softer. I was expecting the low mass carrier to also produce a softer recoil impulse, but it just wasn't the case. The gun had more recoil, required more gas for it to function, and as the gun got dirty, this gun, or this bolt carrier group, was just a lot more prone to carbon when it came down to malfunctioning. So when the gun was freshly cleaned on a setting 4, the gun would work, but just a couple hundred rounds, the gas setting had to go up to 8 just for the gun to function, and at one point we had it up to 10 just for the gun to cycle with the low mass carrier. Now with the full mass bolt carrier group that's in the gun, the MP3 coated one that I showed you guys earlier, the gun functions flawlessly on setting 6, and on setting 5, it's 5 out of the 12 adjustment settings. Setting 5 is just that bleeding edge reliability. So if the gun's freshly cleaned, setting 5, even setting 4, the gun will cycle, but if I want the gun just to run reliably with no questions asked, setting 6, and if the gun's dirty, 7 or 8. Now that we got that out of the way, I just wanted to make sure we talked about the low mass carrier and the original intent of the build between this gun with having a low mass carrier. Not really sure what's going on with the additional friction. I will say KAK is coming out with a titanium low mass carrier that I will try in this gun when it comes out. That will be very expensive, obviously. I think they're saying over $400 for the bolt carrier group, but the aluminum low mass carrier just did not work in this gun, unfortunately. So now let's get into the practical accuracy data that we got comparing the rifle's current configuration to the previous one. So the way we did this was obviously the mock tactical game stage, and before we get into this, I just want to note that there's a lot of variables at play here. So obviously we're shooting under duress, so that physical component induces a lot of variables. And also the second time that I did these stages, it was much colder. It was in the 20s when I did it the second time. The first time it was mid 40s, low 50s, perfectly sunny. The weather was beautiful. So just note that there are some variables here. But all that to say is there wasn't much of a difference with the practical accuracy difference. So as I talk about this, you guys will get to see the targets up close with some B-roll. But the first stage that we did was called "'Tis the Season to Be Jolly." This is a stage name I came up with. It was a sled stage. So basically the work of this stage was 80-meter sled drags, and the sled was about 270 pounds. It was pretty miserable, if I'm being honest. But the rifle target was shot at 50 yards, and the rifle target were these upside down triangles. So if, just for reference, the size of these triangles are about half of a head box, and the position was on the VTAC barricade. So I picked a port on the barricade that was kind of awkward, where it was a little high for a kneeling, obviously way too low for a prone. So it wasn't the easiest position, but the difference between the two guns on that stage was the 16-inch had one more hit comparatively to the 13.9. So there's basically no difference there. Now the next stage we did was a 2-gun stage. So this stage had no physical component behind it. However, I didn't actually proof this stage with the previous rifle configuration of the 13.9 Criterion core. But I have done plenty of 2-gun stages with that gun, and I set it up pretty similar to something I have done before, just so I can get an idea, just a rough comparison basis. So I had something to compare to. Now this stage was called Lucas Sucks at Shooting, but the start of the stage was a tactical games classifier actually, so it was up close shooting where you had a target at 10 yards, 18 yards, and 25 yards where with rifle, you would shoot 2 in each head box in one shooting area, move to the next shooting area, shoot 2 in each head box again, and then you would transition to your pistol, shoot 2 in each torso, run back, shoot 2 in each torso, and that is the entirety of the classifier, but I added some long-range shooting. So the long-range shooting consisted of a head box at 120 yards, it was a hostage type steel, and then a reduced C-zone at 310 yards, and then a full-size silhouette at 510 yards. With the rifle, I cleaned it. I didn't miss any of the shots, so I had 12 rounds to hit all 3 of those targets. I actually hit the 300 twice, but the spotter didn't see it, so with the rifle, I cleaned it, and comparatively to the 39, that's about the same thing that gun would do. When it came down to just being able to shoot steel at distance with these guns, they have been incredible. So no change there basically. And what I would like to have seen a change of was that 510-yard shot to be a little bit easier, as in I didn't have to hold as much, but as we talked about already, the muzzle velocity of this gun is exactly the same as the 39, so having this much longer of a gun didn't give me any benefit, so the gun performed basically exactly the same. Now the last 3 targets on that stage were long-range pistol targets. If you're curious, there was an 80-yard full-size target, the same as the 510 rifle, a reduced C-zone at 60 yards, and then a smaller piece of steel at 40 yards, and with the pistol I was shooting, I didn't miss any of those either. So 2-gun stage went really well, to say the least, but for the rifle data, there was just no difference there. Now the next stage was called So You Want to Dance, and this was a sandbag ladder stage. So this stage is a little bit unique because this is not something you typically see in a tactical games match, but I offered it to our employees because it gave them the opportunity to do higher level weights. So the match was completely set to intermediate weights, which is the lowest level for the tactical games. But if you so desired, if you wanted to, you could try out men's tactical weights or even men's elite weights in this stage. So the way the stage worked was you had to start with the lightest weight sandbag, which was 100 pounds, and you would do a 50-yard carry, come back to the 50-inch tall yoke, and you do 7 reps of putting the sandbag over the yoke, and then after that, the successful completion of that round, you could choose to go up in weight of the sandbag for less distance carry and less reps of the sandbag over the yoke. So next was a 150-pound bag for 30 yards and then 5 reps over the yoke. And then it was a 200-pound bag for 15 yards of carry and then only 3 reps over the yoke. And if you got through all of that, you can do the 250-pound bag for just 1 rep over the yoke. And the incentive behind this is obviously the heavier weights went a lot quicker, so the scoring is based on time. So if you're able to do the 250-pound bag, obviously your time would be much faster than someone who had to do the 100-pound sandbag for all 4 rounds, because they would be carrying at 50 yards and doing all of those reps. So that was kind of the point of the stage. But the shooting on that stage for the rifle was actually really easy. So the way that I set that stage up was super easy rifle shooting, but very difficult pistol shooting. So the pistol targets were at 25 yards, and they were about half the size of a head box. So the idea was you should have 100% of your rifle hits, but if you had 50% of your pistol hits, you did a really good job. But the targets on that stage looked quite like this. So for prone shooting at 50 yards, pretty easy. The only one that's slightly challenging here is the triangle, and that is just because of the shape of it, and it's quite small. But the difference between both of the rifle configurations is the 39 actually did better. It had only 1 miss out of all of the rounds fired. The 16-inch gun with a proof barrel technically had 4 misses. I wrote 3 on the target, but I technically had 4. So this is just going to come into some of the variables at play here. With it just being that much colder, I actually wasn't feeling nearly as good as I was when I did all the stages the first time. I actually went a little bit slower the second go around, so it was just probably me pulling a shot. At 50 yards, when it comes down to just the accuracy difference, the guns aren't going to be necessarily any different. So now the final stage we did was called My Fingers and My Back Hurt. This was an overhead carry and farmer carry stage, and the rifle target on this guy was set at 150 yards. So if there's any stage that we're going to see some practical accuracy difference, this is probably the one. But just to explain the stage a little bit, there was 4 rounds of work. The first round and the last round were of farmer carries, and the middle 2 rounds were of overhead carries. So the farmer carries and the overhead carries was 20 yards down, 20 yards back. For the weights that I did in the men's elite division was 410-pound farmer carry, so 205-pound farmer carry bars in each arm, 20 yards down, 20 yards back, and then the 2 overhead carry rounds were with 185 pounds on the axle bar, so it's a fatter bar. So it's a very heavy stage, but the idea behind this stage is not so much of a conditioning, get your heart rate super high. It's more of just, it really taxes your grip and makes the shooting a little bit difficult. But on that stage, the rifle target shooting, the 16-inch gun with the proof research barrel had 3 less misses. So out of the 60 shots, I only had 9 misses with the proof research barrel comparatively to the Criterion. I had 12 misses. Now, this stage was really difficult for me to complete in time, so that last magazine I fired with rifle was pretty quick, and that is where all of the misses came between both these rifles. So I mentioned that because that is a huge variable that came into play of this data, because I was just sending it on the last magazine, and I think with the proof research barrel, I only had 2 misses before the last magazine, and I missed almost that entire mag because I was just trying to make the time for the stage. So now that we got all of the practical accuracy data from our little Tactical Games mock skirmish, and we have all of the mechanical accuracy data that we've already shown you guys, the question really comes down to, was it worth it to jump up to this proof research barrel over my 13.9 Criterion core? Now, typically speaking, when I'm answering this question in regards to very high-end equipment that's made specifically for competition, it's that Ferrari type equipment, equipment that's made, again, not for duty use, but really geared towards competition, the answer is going to be, it really depends on what you want to do with it. I know that's not the best answer in the world, but again, this gear is not made for the person who is, just that prepared citizen who just wants the equipment to have ready to go in their house if there's a bump in the night, if they need to defend life, extend liberty, that sort of thing. This equipment is made for the person that is trying to eliminate every variable possible in their performance that isn't themselves. So what I mean by that is if I'm going out to compete and I want to compete at the highest level, I want equipment that isn't going to fail me. What I want is if I'm going to lose, it is because of my fault, not the equipment's fault. And that is where this equipment comes into play. It's trying to eliminate all of those variables out of it. So, when you do screw up, when you don't win matches, it's your fault, it's not your equipment. So if you are that person who's trying to push the envelope of your performance, you're competing on a regular basis, that is where I'm going to say, yes, this equipment is for you. I do think this sort of equipment is definitely worth the money, especially if you're representing other brands, you're representing your company that you work for at matches like I do for T.REX. This is where I think this equipment is definitely worth the money. Now, to be a little bit more specific on the question, was this proof research barrel worth it over the Criterion core? And I'm going to say, absolutely not. From the data that we got, I know it's a very small sample size of data. I am much more happy with the experiences I've had with Criterion versus the couple of proof research barrels that we have in the Armory. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, Lucas does have a setup that's very similar to this. He has a 14.5 proof research barrel build. It's the exact same contour, exact same twist. Everything's the same except for the length of the barrel. And his gun was shooting much faster than this gun. However, when he went and shot the match and he recroned his gun is slowing down. So we're seeing a consistent issue with the muzzle velocity of these proof research barrels. So that's definitely something we're going to have to follow up with them on. But all that to say, no, I'm swapping this barrel back out for a Criterion core after this video is done. Now the rest of the equipment that we upgraded with the handguard, the adjustable gas block, the muzzle device, and just 16-inch barrel in general, the premium KAK bolt carrier group, yes, I do think it was worth it. They all improved just the feel of the gun, how much I enjoy the gun, just the enjoyability and the performance of the rifle. I think it was all good. So generally speaking, yes, I will recommend this type of equipment if you're that competitor who, again, wants to push themselves as hard as they can and eliminate as many variables as possible. But if you're someone who is, competing just for fun here and there, your primary purpose is just going to the range to train to be that prepared citizen, no, I would not recommend this equipment. It just has a lot of it has a lot more maintenance. It has a lot more, just things that can go wrong because, again, it's prioritizing the performance side of things, not as much the reliability side of things. Before we close things out, I know you guys are going to have some questions about some of the kit I was using, so I'm just going to go over some of the unique items that I used in this video. Now, Eye Pro, Ear Pro, my pistol belt, all of that is stuff I use on a regular basis, just speed belt, S-Tac pouches, Ragnarok holster, Eye Pro, Oakley's with my high threat Ear Pro, but the plate carrier might be a little bit different from what you guys are normally seeing in our content. So this is a prototype plate carrier that we are working on currently called the FC1 or Fitness Carrier 1. So this is a very minimalist plate carrier that is designed specifically around the Jackrabbit weighted plates for competing in the tactical game. So this is not designed to fit body armor that actually stops bullets. This is, again, just a weighted vest. And actually the front and rear plate bag are exactly the same. This is all just to keep costs down. I've got some interesting designs going on with the cummerbund. So we're not going to talk about all of it too much because again, this is all prototype. And the Fitness Carrier 1 FC1 is definitely coming, but I don't know if it's going to look like this when it does come to market. So I won't talk about it too much. Just know that we are working on a fitness plate carrier designed specifically for the tactical games, and also it will be able to fit CrossFit weight plates for for other people that aren't competing in the tactical games, but they do wear a plate carrier or a weighted vest when they work out on a regular basis. And last thing here is the pistol that I use in the video. So this is the Atlas Gunworks Erebus. So this is a double stack 1911. This is a very, very expensive and premium pistol. Now this isn't my pistol or T.REX's. This is actually Jacob Hepner's. So Jacob Hepner is the three-peat national champion for the men's elite division in the tactical games. And he sent us a couple of his Atlas pistols for holster fitment reasons. So we are trying to make holsters around this gun if we can. So one thing I want to note about this pistol is it is basically cheating. So this gun has a 14-ounce trigger in it. It has no recoil because of this compensator, but this pistol is very expensive. So this is an $8,500 pistol. It's one of their more expensive pistol options. But I mentioned the price because of this optic that's on here. This is a Holosun 507 that is absolutely garbage. Jacob, I don't know how you sleep at night putting a $300 optic on such an expensive pistol. It just blows my mind. Just get something different, an SRO or something. But all that to say, we do really appreciate Jacob sending out his pistols. These are obviously very expensive for holster testing, and then to be able to use in some content like this video. Now, if you guys made it this far in the video, I do really appreciate your time. We had a lot to talk about when it comes down to just the build of this rifle, the data that we got from this video, and then also just recapping our budget AR-15 and our prioritizing value AR-15. And then now we are finally finishing out this video series with this performance AR-15. So again, appreciate you guys' time. And until next time, this is Brandon from T.REX.